I would like to preface this episode by saying that this will be a very heavy episode. When I decided to start this project, I knew I wouldn't be covering strictly bubblegum pop type love songs. Love, of course, is an umbrella term, really, because like most things, love is not just one thing, right? Love can be a beautiful thing. It can make you feel like you are floating, immortal, like nothing can ever bring you down. Conversely, love can be a destructive force that can leave you far worse off than you'd ever imagined you'd be. Heard it in a love song doesn't always mean fluttery butterfly kisses. Sometimes it is toxic, disturbing, dangerous. That being said, this is a content warning for this week's video. Today I will be covering Independence Day by Martina McBride. This being one of the many songs that people listen to without digesting the lyrics properly. Now, this seems to happen a lot with songs that are deemed patriotic, but aren't actually. For example, by the boss, Bruce Springsteen.
It ain't me, it ain't me, I ain't no senator son. It ain't me, I ain't no fortunate one.
By CCR. And
Ain't that America, home of the free, yeah. Little pink houses for you and me. Oh, yeah.
by John Mellencamp. In reality, Independence Day is about one woman's breaking point in a relationship where she is domestically abused and the complicitness of a town that knew it was happening. So I end this warning with this. This episode will cover some very dark topics: domestic abuse, child neglect, alcohol abuse, sexual assault, death of civil rights leaders, etc. But it is important that these things be covered. Thank you, and let's get started. We start our story on July 29th, 1966, in Sharon, Kansas. That is when Daryl and Jean Schiff brought into the world the youngest of their 4 children, Martina Maria Schiff, younger sister to older brothers Marty and Steve, and older sister to Gina. Random fun fact, Marty has actually been in a few films, most notably of which is the original Dawn of the Dead. At the very young age of 4, Martina was exposed to a deep love of music by her father, who played guitar in a very tongue-in-cheek named band, the Shifters. Martina would watch them rehearse in the family living room and would sing along. By the age of 7, she would join them on stage and even upgraded to singing and playing keyboard. She grew up with a steady stream of classic rock and country, telling the Wall Street Journal in a 2014 interview, "In my room, I had a Linda Ronstadt poster on the wall. A portable record player, and a collection of about 20 albums. I had all of her releases and records by Jackson Browne, the Eagles, ZZ Top, Heart, Pat Benatar, Bonnie Raitt, and Journey. I also listened to a lot of country music on the radio, as well as the pop stations my sister listened to. My older brother Steve was into Creedence Clearwater Revival and classic rock, while my younger brother Marty loved country music. Marty and I later shared a love for 80s rock, and in an interview with Opry.com she would state, "I grew up hearing and singing Ernest Tubb, Hank Williams, and Conway Twitty. And of course I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so I definitely listened to Reba too." Growing up in a town with a population of 200 meant that Martina and her family were very close. One of those situations where everybody knows everybody. She also grew up on the land her grandparents owned, 420 acres. Although she would admit her immediate family only owned a small chunk of it, and that her grandparents lived about a mile up the road. From the age of 8 until she graduated high school, Martina would play with the Shifters every weekend. When she graduated, with a graduating class of 9. She was offered a scholarship at the nearby Hutchinson Community College after graduation, but she attended for only 1 semester. Her heart was set on music, and so she began working with local bands and performing throughout the Wichita area with the band The Penetrators. In 1987, while searching for rehearsal space for her new group known as Lotus, she met John McBride, who was a sound engineer that owned, rented, and lived in a warehouse. Lotus wasn't working out the way Martina had hoped, and more often than not, she would spend time alone in that warehouse, crying over the fact that her dreams were fading away. Here I was, crying on his shoulder about my band not coming together, and I thought, I'm in love with this guy. This is crazy. He lives in a warehouse, she told People of her future husband. They married a little over a year later on May 15, 1988, and moved from Wichita, Kansas to Nashville 2 years after that in search of better careers. When she wasn't busy waiting tables in restaurants around Nashville, she was knocking on doors up and down Music Row, hoping to attract the notice of major record labels. John McBride's sound skills helped him get jobs with artists like Charlie Daniels and Ricky Van Shelton, but it was a gig on the road with Garth Brooks' sound crew a few years later that changed their lives forever. Not wanting to be away from each other, John helped her secure a job selling merch at Garth Brooks' merch booth. Her enthusiastic, upbeat spirit caught Brooks' eye. He offered her an opening act slot during his 1992 concert tour with a caveat, only if she could nab herself a recording contract. With a foot in the door, John was about to pass off a demo Martina recorded to an RCA executive, and it was no surprise to John that the executive loved it. This got her signed to RCA in 1991, and she would go on to tell People in an interview that when the label offered to sign her, she could barely believe it. I was like, "Are you sure? Don't be jerking me around," she said. Brooks kept his word, and during her first year under contract, she opened for him on tour. On May 12, 1992, Martina McBride released her first album entitled The Time Has Come. Produced by Ed Shea and Paul Worley, who have worked with other artists like Dolly Parton, Blake Shelton, Neil McCoy, Faith Hill, The Chicks, Lady A, Marie Osmond, The Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, Colin Ray, Sarah Evans, the band Perry, and Jeanette McCurdy, the album rose to number 49 on the Billboard Top Country Albums chart. It includes the singles The Time Has Come,
The time has come to let you go.
Cheap Whiskey, in which, keeping with his support of new country talent, Garth Brooks provided vocal harmonies,
Now the things that will haunt him till the day that he dies. It's the smell of cheap whiskey, the sound of goodbye.
and That's Me.
There's a photo in an album he don't notice anymore. That's me. That's me.
All of which charted on the Billboard country charts. The Time Has Come was the highest peaking of the three, reaching number 23. Unlike her later country pop influenced albums, The Time Has Come featured honky tonk and country folk influences. The overall reception wasn't that great, perhaps because its songs focused on thoughtful subjects, with Martina commenting in an RCA Records press release on her first effort. The first time out, I was really concerned with being taken seriously as an artist. I looked for songs that had a lot to say. I'm not sure that I didn't go over the line with that first album. Maybe it was too serious. Her follow-up album, 1993's The Way That I Am, also produced by Paul and Ed, but this time joining them was Martina herself, was a commercial success. An overhaul into the lighter side of country, aside from Independence Day, she told Edward Morris of Billboard, "Somewhere along the line I realized that music has to be entertaining." This was her breakthrough album, producing her first top 5 hit, My Baby Loves Me.
I high heels or sneakers, he don't give a damn. My baby loves me just the way that I am. My baby loves me just the way that I am.
Which was previously released as a single by a Canadian singer, Patricia Conroy, for her 1992 album, Bad Day for Trains.
High heels or sneakers, he don't give a damn. My baby loves me just the way that I am. My baby loves me just the way that I am.
Martina's version was a number 2 hit on the Billboard Hot Country Songs. Also released as singles from this album were Life Number 9,
Living on life at number 9, breaking my heart. Living on borrowed time.
which reached number 6, Heart Trouble,
Still I sympathize, 'cause you got heart trouble coming on.
which reached number 21, Where I Used to Have a Heart,
Where I used to have a heart feels like a mile wide ditch. I got a hole inside the doctor just can't stitch.
which reached number 49, and Independence Day,
Let freedom ring. Let the white dove sing. Let the whole world know that today is the day of a reckoning.
which reached number 12. Released by RCA as the album's third single, Independence Day received some resistance from radio stations that considered its storyline too sobering for an entertainment-seeking radio audience. Speaking of which, before we get there, we have to go here. We start this part of our story on November 14th, 1957, in Bronxville, New York, about 40 minutes outside of New York City. That is when and where Anne and William Peters brought into the world their fourth child, Gretchen Peters, youngest sister to siblings Jennifer, Suzanne, and Jeffrey. As a child, in the neighborhood of Pelham, New York, about a 15-minute drive from Bronxville, Gretchen observed her father as he worked hard at writing every day. A freelance journalist for CBS News and national magazines, William Peters tapped away, hyper-focused on his typewriter and the civil injustice around him. It was, in fact, his 1956 Red Book article entitled Our Weapon is Love that helped introduce the relatively unknown 27-year-old Martin Luther King Jr. to a wider audience. When she was 7 years old, Gretchen, while at summer camp, would be enthralled by the music her fellow campers were into. Telling SongwritersUniverse.com, everybody wanted to play Bob Dylan and Peter, Paul, and Mary songs. That's when I picked up the guitar. Be it the constant pain that her mother and father felt watching civil rights activist after civil rights activist after civil rights activist slain, two Kennedys.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. Vice President Lyndon Johnson has left the hospital in Dallas, but we do not know to where he has proceeded. Presumably, he will be taking the oath of office shortly and become the 36th President of the United States.
Senator Robert Francis Kennedy died at 1:44 a.m. today, June 6, 1968. With Senator Kennedy, at the time of his death, were his wife Ethel, his sisters Mrs. Stephen Smith, Mrs. Patricia Lawford, brother-in-law Mr. Stephen Smith, his sister-in-law Mrs. John F. Kennedy. He was 42 years old.
Martin Luther King Jr.
Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., civil rights leader and Nobel Prize winner, was shot and killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee. In Washington, at the White House, the news reached President Johnson as he was preparing to leave for Hawaii and conferences on Vietnam and the possibilities of peace negotiations there. The President, we are expecting to make a statement on the tragedy tonight in Memphis very shortly, and are standing by for that.
Malcolm X.
Apparently, two men approached the speaker's rostrum and discharged shots at him from apparently very close range.
As I turned around quickly, and the next thing I saw was Malcolm falling back in a dead faint.
And Medgar Evers.
The bullet hit him in the back, crashed through his body, through a window into the house. He died within an hour at a Jackson hospital.
Whose widow, Merle, and her 3 children spent time with the Peters family while William helped her write her memoir, For Us the Living, or the fact that sometimes people drift apart. Either way, when Gretchen was 8 years old, her parents split. She was in 8th grade when she moved with her mother to Boulder, Colorado. As an inspiring guitarist and songwriter, Gretchen would often beg her mom to take her to see her favorite artists perform in bars around Boulder. And while most mothers would be shocked and appalled at the very idea of it, in an interview with CountryMusicHallOfFame.org, Gretchen said, "My mother got that it was so important to me. I wouldn't be here if she hadn't gone with me and let me do that." It was the mid-70s, and Gretchen got involved in the local music scene, playing in a few hippie country rock bands. And in her spare time, sneaking off to record stores to purchase the latest Nashville records. In an interview with Rolling Stone, she would say, "It was not cool to be a country music fan at the time at all. I would go in there, and it was kind of like going to see my dealer, you know? He'd slip me a few George Jones records and say, 'Go listen to this, kid.'"
He stopped loving her today. They placed a wreath upon his door.
She would go on to lead a country rock band for many years in Colorado, recording and playing regularly. And in 1987, she relocated to Nashville. I had felt I had done everything I could do in Boulder, playing the club circuit. I knew I had to be someplace where people did this for a living. I started writing not because I thought I could be a writer, because it seemed that that's what people did there, she explained to SongwritersUniverse.com. I was just really emulating what I saw going on, and much to my surprise, shock really, I entered a local radio contest and won. And they started playing my stuff on the radio even after the contest. They liked it so much they kept on playing it. In Nashville, she found herself at a crossroad, though. Was she a singer? A songwriter? A little bit of both? She would go on to say, "Everybody that I love is both. You wouldn't even separate those two things. I mean, you wouldn't call Paul Simon a singer, and you wouldn't call Joni Mitchell a singer. So I've always kind of had an uneasy feeling about the whole singer versus songwriter school of thought." She chose the path to be a little bit of both. Record executive Tony Brown liked a demo she gave to him, so he recommended her to music publisher Noel Fox at Silverline Goldline Music. Fox gave her a publishing contract, and known as a renegade publishing firm, Silverline Goldline's roster included Gail Davies, who was the first female record producer in country music history, Ron Davies, Gail's older brother, best known for having written It Ain't Easy for David Bowie, and Long Hard Climb for Helen Reddy.
And hasn't it been a long, hard climb? Everything taking its own sweet time.
Steve Earle, whose songs have been recorded by Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Levon Helm, The Highwaymen, Travis Tritt, Vince Gill, Patty Loveless, Sean Colvin, Bob Seger, Percy Sledge, and Emmylou Harris, Jimbo Hinson, who has written country hits for a number of artists, including the Oak Ridge Boys,
My heart's on fire, hellfire.
David Lee Murphy, Patty Loveless, Brenda Lee, John Conley, and Steve Earle. Fox encouraged Peters to write alone, saying that she felt more comfortable and creative that way, instead of following the Music Row norm of co-writing with others. "Don't follow the rules if you don't have to," Fox told her. "Do whatever makes you write." "It was such a great gift he gave me," she would say. Peters later signed with Sony Music through executive and record producer the aforementioned Paul Worley. Her first song to be cut was the title song of Highway 101's 1989 album, Paint the Town.
Oh, I paint the town, turn it upside down. There won't be nothing left when I get through.
Her first real hit came a few years later when George Strait recorded her song Chill of an Early Fall.
Here it comes again. That same old chilly wind will blow like a cold winter squall, and I'll begin to feel the chill of an early fall.
And when that song reached number 1, things began looking up for Gretchen. When it reached number 1, I thought, that was easy, let's do that again. But in the case of George Strait, everything he cut at the time went to number 1. And she's not wrong. George Strait has the highest number of number 1 hits at a staggering 60, proving you can't spell George Strait without GOAT. Where she really proved herself will be the topic of today's video. My papa, Rex Hunt, was a singer-songwriter, and is actually in the Rockabilly Hall of Fame. I own his songbook, and it's really cool to see how he wrote songs. It wasn't always a straightforward thing. Some songs started with a chorus, big red arrow pointing down to where it should actually go. Art does not have to be linear, and that is exactly how Independence Day started. In an interview with TheBoot.com, Gretchen Peters would say, "The chorus's idea is what happened for me first. And really, the chorus doesn't tell you a whole lot. It was just a series of images. And there wasn't much narrative there. So for a while, I was in the situation that I often find myself in, where I'm like, what the hell is this all about? I like it, but what's going on?" There was this process of almost solving a mystery. Something cataclysmic has happened here, but what is it, and who are the characters involved? It took 18 months to write it. As I lived with it, the story of the mother and daughter started to come, and I knew, obviously, the Independence Day thing was a metaphor for the mother in the song finding her freedom. How does a woman in that situation find freedom? I was still a relatively young songwriter, and I really wanted to find a happy ending, or at least one that wasn't so dire and dismal. That's why it took me so long to write the song, because I kept trying to make things work out okay. The whole idea of independence on a more personal level for one person, for a woman, sort of became clear to me, and that woman is in a dire situation. And when I sort of got a handle on that, I was off and running, really, with the verses. Except for the fact that I couldn't end it. I couldn't figure out how it was supposed to end. That was really problematic for me. I think I knew in my bones how it was going to end. I was struggling with that because I was trying to figure out another way, other than her burning the house down. And in the end, I thought, nope, this is what happens in this particular story. I think it was compelling for people probably because there was no pat ending. It didn't work out all right. It's a terrible, tragic thing. And I found it ironic, really, that I struggled so long with that ending, trying to find another way out. And afterwards, I thought, well, it's kind of like the character in the song. I'm sure she looked for a way out, every other possible way, before she made that choice. Gretchen says in her mind that the female character in the song dies in the fire, but that little piece of information was for me. It's kind of like when actors talk about how they get a script and they read about the character, and sometimes they'll write an entire outline of this character's life with details that you never hear about in the movie, ultimately. But they need that for them, and I needed that for me in this case. In Independence Day, she sacrificed herself as well, but I didn't need that to be in the song. I needed it for me, simply just to go all the way inside emotionally. Again, it's been interpreted both ways. As for writing it from the perspective of an 8-year-old girl, Gretchen says it was an intentional choice. I did kind of have some emotional grounding to understand at least how it feels from a child's point of view to have their world just come apart like that, and feel like things are out of control, and that they're just in the way. I had some understanding of that. I think I did it subconsciously, but very purposefully, so that I could dig my teeth into it, because I could really understand that. When I think back on the song, I realize I use this thing that I often use in songs, which is what I think of as the omniscient child. That's where the child is the character who's telling the story, because children see everything and just tell you what happened very simply. They're like little reporters. So it made sense for me to tell the story from a perspective of a child, because she could just say what happened and let you, the listener, figure out how you feel about it. So let's break down the narrative of the story told in Independence Day. On 4th of July, in an unspecified year, in an unspecified small town, an 8-year-old wakes up to see that her mother, seemingly doing all right for a rare moment, was still very clearly not okay. The signs of last night's alcoholic bout of domestic abuse apparent on her cheek. The father, now entering the scene, started arguing with the mother again, and rather than get in their way, the girl leaves the house to go check out the town's Independence Day fair. While walking around and doing all the typical fair-type activities, games, food, etc., she couldn't help but hear the whispers and hushed voices talking about the secret that wasn't very well kept, that her mother was abused. Sadly, the town was complicit, knowing the domestic abuse was happening, but not doing anything about it. But the girl realized that even if they had offered to do anything, her mother's pride and years of abuse made her all too aware that she was on the losing end of the situation. The parents, seemingly the only ones not at the fair, were left to their own devices. And that is when the mother, reaching her breaking point, set the house on fire with them inside. The whole town rushing back towards the smoke now billowing. The girl was taken to a county home and left with her own thoughts on the situation, not knowing if it was right, not knowing if it was wrong, but understanding that sometimes that's the only way out. The story, subconsciously at least, took inspiration from a very real case, that of Francine Hughes. And this is where the content warning from the beginning really comes into play. If you would like to skip this very disturbing story of what happened to Francine Hughes, here's the time code to skip to. In 1963, in Stockbridge, Michigan, 16-year-old Francine Moran met and married James Mickey Hughes. 8 years of abuse and 4 kids later, their divorce was finalized. Mickey began to abuse her shortly after the marriage, Hughes told People. I bought some new clothes and he ripped them off, I recalled. I don't know whether I looked too pretty or what, but he didn't seem to want me to look that way. Though Mickey seemed remorseful at first, his abuse became a pattern. And soon, Francine had 4 children and a husband who spent much of their money on alcohol. In 1971, she spoke with a local social worker and decided to divorce Mickey, but he ignored the divorce decree, coming and going at will and beating her every time. Although they had moved away from each other in April 1971, a car accident later that summer brought Mickey back into her life, and Francine later testified in court that although she was reluctant to have him return to the home, she felt she could not refuse and she did not want to, quote, hurt him more than he already had been, referring to the severity of the injuries from the accident. She did try to get away. Her son, James Hughes, remembers in The Burning Bed, a short documentary from Retro Report, but he would also tell her, there is nowhere you can go, bitch, that I won't find you. Then, on March 9th, 1977, Mickey lashed out on Francine, who had attempted to enroll in secretarial school with her mother's assistance. He forced her to burn her books, demanded she drop out, and threatened to destroy her vehicle. He threw out the meal she cooked and then dumped the garbage on the floor and smeared her face in it. Terrified, Francine called the cops, but they refused to arrest Mickey since they had not witnessed the abuse themselves, even though he threatened them and told her it was all over since she had called for help. When they left, he continued beating her and raping her, and after he fell asleep, quote, I was thinking about all the things that had happened to me. all the times he had hurt me, how he had hurt the kids, Francine would tell People. I stood still for a moment, hesitating, and a voice urged me on. It whispered, "Do it. Do it. Do it." She acted swiftly, putting her kids in the car and pouring gasoline around Mickey's bed and lighting a match. As the house went up in flames, she drove to Ingham County Jail to turn herself in. By the time firefighters reached the house, her husband was dead of smoke inhalation, and Francine was arrested and charged with murder. Her case was all too familiar to a group of feminist activists who had been trying to call attention to domestic violence for years. Ever since the fight for women's suffrage, women have been trying to turn the tide on spousal abuse. One of the earliest political movements supported by the movement, temperance, was closely tied to domestic abuse. Anti-alcohol advocates claimed that drunken men were more likely to beat and harm their wives and children, and used images and stories of women who had been attacked by their drunken husbands to gain support for their cause. Hugh's story has been told before. The Burning Bed documentary, released a year ago, borrows its title from journalist Faith McNulty's 1980 book about the Hugheses, and from the 1984 TV movie adaptation starring Farrah Fawcett. The documentary emphasizes how groundbreaking Francine Hughes' case was. Lee Atkinson, who was an assistant prosecutor in her case, says that, at the time, police officers would not arrest someone for a misdemeanor unless they saw the crime committed. At a time when the criminal justice system failed to even deal with domestic violence because, as an evening news broadcast put it, traditionally, wife beating had been considered a family affair. Hughes' case initiated a sea of change, forcing a long-suppressed conversation about domestic violence in America. In an interview for the film, Hughes' lawyer recalls that, because Mickey had been asleep, I did not think I could convince the jury necessarily that she was not guilty because she was defending herself, so I used the temporary insanity hook. He invoked an idea that would come to be known as battered women syndrome, a term coined by psychologist Lenore Walker based on her research with abused women in the US and the UK. She identified a group of psychological symptoms, fear, guilt, and denial, that occurs in victims of intimate partner abuse. This combination, which has since been classified as a form of PTSD, can make discerning the level of risk in a given moment amid an ongoing pattern of trauma difficult. The defense worked, and Hughes was acquitted, in an unexpected victory for her and the feminist movement. In 1994, Congress passed the Violence Against Women Act.
Mr. Speaker, it is disturbing that the death of Nicole Simpson, a tragedy affecting the rich and the famous, should be necessary to force us to take notice of the horror of domestic violence. Mr. Speaker, 80% of homicides in Vermont involve domestic partners or family members. All of the 6 women slain in Vermont during 1993 died at the hands of an intimate partner or a family member. Nationally, 3 out of every 10 women who are victims of homicide were murdered by a spouse or an intimate partner, and every 15 seconds, a woman is battered by her husband or a boyfriend. Mr. Speaker, we have 17 programs in Vermont that work with victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, and 92% of the people who provide those services are volunteers. These volunteers, most of whom are women, are doing an extraordinary job in counseling and supporting the victims of domestic violence. But they need help. Mr. Speaker, I have a number of serious problems with the crime bill, but one part of it that I vigorously support is the Violence Against Women Act. We urgently need the $1.8 billion in this bill to combat the epidemic of violence against women on the streets and in the homes of America. Thank you.
Which established a national domestic abuse hotline, forced all states and jurisdictions to recognize and enforce victim protection orders, and provided funding for domestic violence training for law enforcement officers, among other provisions. By the time Francine Hughes passed away in 2017, domestic abuse had been a major national issue. But that doesn't mean it's been resolved, and even today, 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner, and 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men will be victims of severe physical abuse by an intimate partner during their lifetime. If you are experiencing domestic violence, call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 or chat with a worker at www.thehotline.org. Martina McBride is the spokesperson for many domestic abuse charities, among them the National Domestic Violence Hotline, the National Network to End Domestic Violence, and the Tulsa Domestic Violence and Intervention Services. She has dedicated herself to the plight of women and children in emotional and physically abusive relationships, and her recording of the song has had a resounding effect on domestic abuse awareness. Along with songwriter Gretchen Peters, they have raised many hundreds of thousands of dollars for various causes having to do with domestic abuse, whether it be alcoholism, drug abuse, physical and or emotional abuse. Peters says, "We've done a bunch of benefit things for various causes having to do with that. Police working on domestic abuse cases, that sort of thing. But Martina's really taken the banner. She's really made it something amazing. It's a part of her work. I can't tell you the number of times that I've done that song and had a woman come up to me at the end of the show trying to keep it together and then just losing it and crying. And I usually know. I usually can just feel it. I know what it means. And it's usually that she's been through a situation like that. Or in some cases, I've met women who have lost sisters in similar situations. And it's the most powerful thing. It's the most humbling thing. Because you've told this story and you get emotionally involved with it, but it's still fiction to you. And these people have lived it. And they feel safe enough and open enough to come to you and just be that vulnerable in front of you, and share these incredibly painful and deeply personal memories with you. It's quite something. It used to make me slightly uncomfortable because I didn't know what to do or say, but I guess I'm just a people pleaser and I wanted to make it okay or something. And you can't make something like that okay. And now I guess I've taken on a little bit more grace about it. And I just usually give them a hug. Because what can you do? What can you really do? You could just share that moment with them, and that's really what they want. They just want to tell their story. I think that's why people respond to music and to songs like that, because they tell the story for them, in a sense, in a way that maybe they can't. Peters makes a vocal appearance in the video for the song. It's her voice singing Amazing Grace in the very beginning, and she says it was a humbling experience. It's very rare as a writer that you get a chance to hear your song, or you even come close to hearing your song as though you've never heard it before. But I'll tell you, I worked on the video, and when I first saw the video, when I sat down and they showed it to me, I cried too. It really moved me. The scene for the burning of the house was shot once. They only had one house to burn, and Martina, determined to get the shot the first time, nailed it. There was a rumor that Reba McEntire originally was pitched the song, but according to Gretchen Peters, it's exactly that, a rumor. Conservative radio talk show host Sean Hannity started using the chorus of the song as his introduction music in 2001, post 9/11. Regarding Hannity playing the song, Peters told Songfacts.com, "They have to pay me every time they play it. I can't make them stop. I don't agree with the guy on anything, but they do pay me. I guess it kind of puts me in a slightly better position to support the causes that I believe in, with Planned Parenthood, MoveOn.org, PFLAG, and other organizations being some that she donated to. I know that he's using it. I know he's completely disregarding what the song's about. It has nothing to do with patriotism or anything. But that's an old story. That's a really old story. I think it was Reagan who used Born in the USA for his campaign song. And people wanted to say, hey, have you listened to that song? It's about the Vietnam War. Hello? So that goes on all the time. And I just figure as long as they pay, and that gives me the wherewithal to support causes that I believe in, it all works out in the end. Martina McBride estimates that the number of fans who told her how the song touched them personally is in the thousands, telling the Houston Press, "You hear people say, I'd been in an abusive relationship for 14 years, and I got in the car and heard the song and made my decision to leave. It's like, wow, that's the power of music. One of the most moving stories was a woman that said her husband had committed suicide, and she's always carried this guilt about it. And she heard that song and realized that it sort of set her free in a way. So music is really powerful. And that song particularly is such a well-written song, it's really just like poetry. However, Independence Day did meet with some resistance from the radio, she says. Yeah, I think we had 10 or 12 stations that never even played it. Everybody thinks it was this huge #1 song, but I think it peaked at like 11 or something. So it was a fight to get it on the radio. Then, in June 1994, not all that long after the song had been released, the Nicole Brown Simpson murders happened, and domestic abuse suddenly became the nation's #1 topic of conversation. So we went from being something that nobody wanted to talk about or play on the radio to a topic that was on the news every hour and on the radio stations. Even at the time, she says that she could watch people's attitude changing after Independence Day force some uncomfortable issues into the light. I had one radio programmer tell me, when the video's on, my daughter walks through the house, and now I have to explain to her what the song is about and what's going on. And I was like, that's a bad thing? Wouldn't you want to use this as an opening to sit down and talk to your daughter about some of this stuff? It might be a good thing to talk about with her, really. But I guess it was just something that not really a lot of people wanted to talk about back then. There's an undeniable depth to the song Independence Day. The bells of freedom that clang throughout.
Let freedom ring. Let the white dove sing.
Martina McBride's powerful voice belting out the story of a woman who was left with no other choice. That it makes me sad that that depth is erased in favor of some nationalistic bullshit. The fact that even to this day, you could hear the song being played as background noise during 4th of July fireworks shows only goes to show you that depressing lyrics not being sung depressingly will lead to a popular song that people will always misconstrue as something else. Independence Day is in a key of C major and clocks in at 116 beats per minute. In lieu of today's love homework, I will be placing some numbers and websites on the screen that will lead to help if you or anyone you know are dealing with a domestic abuse situation. If you enjoyed learning the stories behind the songs that stick with you, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. I release an episode every Friday and take requests in the comments. Until next time, my name is Richard Hunt, and you heard it in a love song.
You know, Independence Day has meant so much to me. It's just an incredible song. I feel really lucky that I got the chance to record it. And now I want to talk with the writer of the song, Ms. Gretchen Peters. Tell me about Independence Day. I mean, it's so incredible. It's just a wonderful song.
You know, the whole thing was a big surprise to me. I mean, from writing it to when I was done with it, I was sure that it wouldn't be recorded. It was one of those things that I never expected to happen, and it obviously turned out wonderfully for all of us.
So is it just a story that came from people you know, from friends, from your imagination, just to...
I mean, I didn't have any personal experience with the subject or anything like that, but I think anybody that looks into the subject has to be outraged by it, and that's where it came from. Other than that, it came from the blue.
Well, Gretchen, you know, you have a record deal, and you're getting ready to make your first album. Are you working on it now?
I'm working on it now.
And I'm so proud for you, and we're all so happy for you. Now, you're going to save me some of your songs, though, right?
There's a few of them out there now. I've saved a few for myself, but there's some. Yeah,
good.
Definitely.
Well,
it's been really fun watching Independence Day, you know, all the things that it's done. It's been really fun just being a part of this. I think it's a great message for little girls.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
I do too. I got one letter in particular this little girl wrote, and she said, I'm 8 years old, and she said, I love the video and then the song, and what I think the video means is that if you're in a relationship, no, she said, what I think the song means is if you're in a relationship like the one in the video, get out before somebody gets hurt.
That's
Love
it.
Amy or whatever. And it was like that. It was just that paragraph, and it was just like, yes, she got it and put it so eloquently but so simply, you know.